LS500 Evaluation of reference services. Today we're going to talk a little bit about how to evaluate a reference service. And this is very important because if we don't have evaluation, if we don't have an assessment of our reference service, then we won't be able to improve the level of service to our patrons. So in librarianship, and I think in any other profession, but let's focus on librarianship and those professions that are service oriented. You have to be constantly evaluating the services that you provide to the community. Why? Because the idea is not to do always the same thing. The idea is to improve, to get better, to provide a better service. I think that's one of the things we have to aim at. And again, I think this is true for other industries too, but of course we are talking about and other areas of the library, that's for sure. But in this case, we're talking especially in regards to the reference service. The reference service, as I have said many times before, it is, in my opinion, at the core of librarianship. Okay, there are other functions of the library that are very important too. I'm not saying the other ones are not important, such as collection management, acquisition, technical, the technical department, where do you do conservation or preservation, where you do cataloging, indexing, abstracting, etc., etc. But in my opinion, and this again is a personal opinion, the reference service is the most is at the core of our profession. So being able to evaluate and assess how we are providing that service and trying to get better at it, it's very important, because that's what the patrons, our clients, our community is going to see. How are we servicing the community? And if we do a very good job and we improve more and more, of course, we're going to see the resources that we need coming to the library. Okay, and we're going to see also an increase of patronage to the library. We'll see more people coming into the library because the word will get around our community that we are providing a great service. So I guess I'm answering my first slide here. Why evaluate? And let's see what it says. But I think we already talked about it. Assess and improve the quality of existing service. To me, that's the key. Assessing and evaluating only has one purpose, and that's improving. If you're not going to do anything about it, if you're not planning to, once you get your results of your assessment or of your evaluation, if you don't plan to do and to step up of the service, then don't evaluate the service. It doesn't make any sense. But if you are committed to improving, then do a evaluation, do an assessment of how you're providing those services, so you will be able to improve. Also, and this is a key here, you, through evaluation, through assessment, you will be able to identify the need for new type of services or programs. And this is very important because you want to add to your library offerings. Of course, everything is tied to your budget. Okay, so you have to take into consideration your mission, your vision, your strategic plan, and your budget, which is part of your strategic plan, to see if you can implement new services and programs. If it is not possible, then you may be able to improve what you are offering. And another point that is also a key in today's lack of funding environment is that by assessing and by evaluating and by improving your services and developing and implementing new services and programs, you're able to justify funding and support and ask for more funding and more support, because it will show data. You will be able to show data of what you're doing for the community. So that's at least 3 reasons why we have to evaluate and assess our reference service. More reasons, we have 2 more here. It's manage human and physical resources more effectively and efficiently. And this point here, of course, is a human resource reason. Okay, once you have evaluated your staff and the activities they are doing and how they are performing in the reference services, you may have an idea, if you are the director of that library, how to use them better. Not everyone has the same skills or the same for communication or for electronic searching or for use of resources, etc. And also, and I think we have to add here, not only you're going to manage your human and physical resources better, and physical meaning your collections and your and the programs and services that you provide, but in terms of your humans, in terms of your human resources, you may decide to do some professional development. So this will mean also, let's put it in here, or let's put it in parentheses, professional development. Because through the evaluation of your resources, of your human resource, you may find out that your staff need some workshops, they need more professional development, they need to take some classes so they get more proficient. And they will, of course, once they have gotten the train that they need, they may very well provide a better service. Okay. And this, I think, we already mentioned a little bit of the need to justify with actual data your services, and the need for additional services and additional programs for your library. Okay, all of these, I think it's very important. Now we can evaluate. I would call it 3 stages or three phases of the process. One we call the inputs, the process itself, and then the outputs and the outcomes. Okay, let's see what I'm talking about. Okay, here we have this, I guess, this table. It looks like a table, or this diagram here, and we see here at the top that we have inputs, and if we have this arrow, double arrow process, and another one that has outputs and outcomes. And what it means is that everything is interrelated. Inputs, it's of course related to process, and then from the process you have the output and the outcome. And we're going to see there is a difference between output and outcome, and we're going to see that later. So in inputs, what we have is the quality of information, your resources and your collection. That's very important. And of course, in your library, you have to aim at having good authority resources, and especially in your reference collection. Okay, so this is one input that you have to have. Then you have to have communication. That means communication between your staff and your patrons. Good communication skills. And then we have, and this is very important, and communications is part of this too. You have to have a skill set. And skill set meaning being able to communicate well with your patron, then being able to have a positive transaction, a positive reference transaction. Okay, and for that, how you have to be knowledgeable about your information sources. You have to be knowledgeable about and that includes printed and electronic, as well as electronics. You have to be knowledgeable about your catalog and how to use the catalog. You have to be knowledgeable and skillful using electronic resources. If you have academic databases, commercial databases, trade databases, if you are going to use the open web or the World Wide Web, you have to be proficient in searching. And finally, another of the variables that is a very important output, of course, is the quality of the technology. And that means, for example, having good computers, having a good access to the internet, a fast access, being able to connect to your OPAC, even if it's a remote connection, etc., etc., etc. So the quality of the technology is another input in this evaluation process. Okay, so we have quality of information, communication, competencies, and quality of technology. That's what we call the input variables that we have to assess and evaluate. Then another area that we have to evaluate is what I call here the process. And the process, of course, is the patron-staff interaction or the user-staff interaction. And how that interaction takes place. It may be face-to-face, in person. It may be a distance interaction. It may be asynchronous or synchronous. For example, if we do online reference, it's a distance interaction. If we do it asynchronous, means that we're doing it in real time. Asynchronous would mean that we are using, for example, email. Well, we have to evaluate that interaction. And that means communication skills, use of technology, use of the collection. Okay, that's another part that we have to evaluate. And the third part, and here we'll see a little bit of difference between outputs and outcomes. And outputs would be quality of answer, but when we talk about, and I'll explain this later, for example, what is perceived by the user, how helpful was the transaction, that would be an outcome. If the user was able to solve the informational problem, that would be an outcome. Value added to the user knowledge base, relevancy and pertinent instruction, and what it is most important to evaluate is the satisfaction. Okay, users or patrons' satisfaction, because in the end, that's what we are there for. It's not to satisfy ourselves; it's that we provided the most pertinent and relevant information to the user. And here is an explanation of what I just said. Level of evaluation inputs, resources available to provide a service. In the reference collection, we're talking about reference here. Print, electronic, CD, web-based databases, virtual materials, etc. Competency, skills, knowledge of information sources. This is very, very important. Level of evaluation, the process. We talk about the interaction. We talk about the reference interview. And remember, at the heart of the reference service is the reference interview. And during the semester, I have made emphasis how important it is to be able to do well the reference interview, because that will be the key for a positive outcome and a positive for a positive output and for a positive outcome too. And then that was this interaction in person or it was a distant interaction. You can evaluate that too. In terms of outputs, we measure the quality of providing the services. Was the in what terms? Well, answering reference questions, accuracy and completeness. Was the staff member, was the librarian able to answer the reference question? Yes. How accurate? How complete? That would be an output that we have to measure. However, and you'll see the difference. We're not measuring patron satisfaction or user satisfaction. Assistant giving in using sources, and that's part of instruction. I think these go together here. And of course, we talked before about the different levels or models of library instruction. I think it was in my previous lecture. And here are the outcomes. And as we can see, there is a difference between what an output is and an outcome. Because the output measures if the staff member, if the librarian was able to provide a good answer, a complete answer, an accurate answer. However, in order to measure the output, we have to measure the outcome. I'm sorry. This is the output, and this is the outcome. In order to measure the outcome, we have to measure from the point of view of the user. Okay, that's the difference. When we measure output, we measure from the point of view of the library and the staff and the librarian. When we measure outcome, we're measuring from the point of view of the user or the patron. Did the answer meet the user's information needs? What was the level of satisfaction? What was the level of knowledge gain or improve in terms of being an independent learner? Okay? So please make sure you understand this difference between an output and an outcome. Because an output may be excellent, but an outcome may be not as good. If the user feels that his problem, his information or her informational problem was not full address, or that the answer was not pertinent or relevant. And that only can be told by the user or the patron. That's an outcome, okay? When we evaluate, and of course we have to evaluate, one of the inputs we have to evaluate is our informational sources or information sources. I must say information sources. So here is a brief explanation of how to evaluate a print source. And by the way, much of this criteria also applies to electronic resources. Okay? So what is the criteria? We're going to talk about authority, currency, physical condition, format, target audience, curriculum needs, objectiveness, etc. Of course, not everything applies to electronic media, because in electronic media we are not concerned so much with physical condition or format, but we are mostly concerned with authority and currency. And what that means is who is producing the information. Okay, that's what authority means. Who is publishing the information? And authority must be assessed by the librarian. Okay, and we have to also educate the user to assess and evaluate information sources in terms of authority. Okay? Again, and I think I have mentioned this before, it does not mean that we are going to censor information. No, we are going to provide the user with many information sources. But we as professionals can tell the user or the patron what we think are the most authoritative sources. Okay, that's the difference. The user and patron has the right to choose and select any or all information sources. But we as professionals have the right, the ethical duty to, to explain to the user why we think this information is better than the other. And that is based not in our own bias or in our own opinions. It is based on the authority of the information. And that means who is producing and publishing the information source. Another criteria, of course, is currency. And currency means how up to date that the information is. And this is especially a concern with printed sources, but with electronic sources it is also true. Okay, that's why I have been asked this question many times about using the internet, the open web for search. I have no problems with that. When you ask me, well, can I Google this or can I Google that? Yes, you can Google anything. Just beware that Google does not produce any information. Google is a search engine. So Google does not, in most of cases, they may produce some information, but in most cases, it's only a search engine. So you may Google whatever you want to Google. However, the information that you're going to provide to your patron, to your client, to your user, will come from what this search engine has retrieved. Because what Google does is index the information, the links that are in the web. So it's up to you as the professional to provide the best information sources to your user or to your client or to your patron. And you have to assess and evaluate the authority of that information. It's not Google. Every hit that you get, every website, every link that you get through Google is not Google. Google will not assess the quality of the information for you. You have to do it. And one way to do it is look for authority and look for currency. But this is also true, again, for printed sources. Because not everything that is published in a book format with real paper means that has an authority. Or that is printed in a newspaper has authority. Or printed in a magazine has authority. I'm sure you have experience, as I do, when you are in the marketplace or in buying some grocery in the grocery store, and you are in the paying in the cash register, you'll see the magazines that are there and the tabloids and the newspapers that are there for you to buy. and the type of news that you will read there. Now, my question is there any authority on those printed pamphlets, tabloids, newspaper, serials, etc.? Of course not. So it depends on you as a professional to provide the user with the best authoritative sources, and that applies to printed as well as electronic sources. Physical condition, of course, is very important if we're working with the printed collection. Why? Because we want our reference collection to be in a good healthy, in a good state. We don't want books with pages missing or with dirt on it, etc., etc. So if we find, and that's part, of course, of collection development and collection management, but we have to be aware of that. Format is very important. Are we looking for a map? Are we looking for illustrations? Are we looking for color? Are we looking for a large format, small format, etc.? Target audience. That's something also that we have to take into consideration with electronic and printed resources. And we're going to talk about electronic resources later, but I like to mix things. And this applies for both. Why? Because it will not be the same information source that you provide to a professor if you're working in a academic library than the information that you will provide to a school age child. So target audience is very important, and you have to consider that. Also, you have to consider the curriculum needs and objectiveness. Objectiveness, it's harder to assess or harder to evaluate. Okay, so I don't do objectiveness because I think almost everything is subjective. I go for authority. If we concern is with health, I'm going to get something from the CDC. I feel comfortable. Okay, let's see if we have the CDC somewhere here. Okay, because I know the CDC, the Center for Disease Control, is an authoritative source for health issues. That's only an example. Okay, if I want something about librarianship and getting my information from the Library of Congress, I know that's an authoritative source. If I want to learn about APA citation style and I'm getting the APA manual, I know I'm getting a good authoritative source. So for me, that's what it is important. Of course, other evaluations is a standardized list, interlibrary loan request, and collection mapping software. These are some examples of tools that we can use to evaluate print sources. Evaluation of electronic sources, user interface becomes very relevant. Just as in print sources, format was relevant, here is the interface. Because interfaces are different. Some are more friendly than others. Some offer more information than others. So that's something that we must evaluate and assess, and it will depend also on our target audience. If we're working with children, they may need an easier interface to interact with. If we're working with older adults, they may also need an easier interface to interact with. If we're working with teenagers and college age populations, they may well be very proficient interacting with more complex interfaces. So we have to match complexity with our population, with our user, with our patron. Does it have a health file? This is very important. Content, vis purpose and target audience, and currency is very important. And of course, just as the other one is authority, authority, and let me see if this can be corrected. Okay, authority and currency. How current the information is. Okay, let me save this. Electronic sources, design, and this is very important. We talk about the interface in terms of academic or in terms of databases in general. Record structure, navigation, visual elements, hyperlinks, overall use interface, and authority here is already here. So authority for me is the key. And also matching the interface with your target audience. I just provide some examples of how complex or how simple the interface must be according to your target audience. And also content is very important too. And you have to match your target audience with your content. Another very important variable to assess and evaluate is, of course, your librarians, your reference staff. And here are some things that we have to take into consideration. Approachability, knowledge of the reference collection. To me, this is a given. I mean, if you are a reference librarian and you don't know your reference collection, you're a strikeout. Knowledge of local services and referral, very important. Skills in identifying user needs, and this has to do with what? The reference interview. And communication with users also has to do with the reference interview. Okay, I'm not going to go into detail because we already talked about the reference interview. Evaluation of user satisfaction. Here we're evaluating outcome. Assess satisfaction of all type of users, including specific populations. How do we assess that? Well, we can use interviews face-to-face. We can do it by phone. We can do it via web or by any other means possible. The idea is to be able to assess the satisfaction of our patrons. What we also another evaluation methods that not others but evaluation methods that we can use. We can do surveys or questionnaires. Of course, keep them short because people don't like to spend too much time filling up a survey. We can observe. That's a very good idea to do. If you want to observe a transaction between the staff and a user, and then you can talk to the staff member and to see and give the staff member your observations on how that transaction can be improved. You can have interviews and focus groups, or you can have case studies. Surveys or questionnaires. You, of course, are going to you're going to find out the user's perspective, attitudes and opinions. You can reach a large number of people. It can be done in person or online, or it can be also done by telephone. It's unobtrusive, and if you do it online, you may have a lower response rate. And this is observation. In observation, what you're going to find out is behavior. You may do direct observation. This is what I was talking about before. As a user and librarian know they're being observed and being watched. Okay, Unobtrusive, this is something that you may try to do is you disguise yourself as a user. Of course, this is in large libraries, and this is if you're doing a research project, and you have to have, if you want to use that data, you have to have the consent of the librarian. But it will be possible. I have seen this happening in television, for example. I have never done it myself, but I have seen it on television. But one way to evaluate staff and librarians is that they can do self-reporting. They can fill up a journal. Okay. Remember, this is not the idea here. Is not to evaluate for punishment. That's not the idea. The idea is to evaluate the service to make it better. So it's not a matter of singling out a staff member. No, what we or what we wanted to do is evaluate the service, and if we find out that a staff member is lacking in terms of communication skills or knowledge about the information sources, or lack of knowledge in terms of searching, electronic searching, etc., then we have to do professional development. We have to bring up that set of skills. But it's not for punishment, it's for making the service better. We can inspect or review chat logs, emails. We could do even recordings and videos, instructional recordings and videos on how to do a good reference transaction. Of course, and this is very important, there are privacy and there are ethical issues too. Ethical issues. In other words, we cannot be recording or a video of somebody doing something without permission, without a written permission, a written signed consent form. But these are some ways that we can evaluate our staff. Let me save that. Other methods that we can use for this type of evaluation. And by the way, these are research methods. So if you're taking a research class, I'm sure you have reviewed this methodology. We can have interviews, focus group. We can try to understand. Here we're trying to understand the experience. And you see how different it is? When we do surveys, this is what we're going to be answered. Finding user perspective, attitudes, and opinions. When we do observation, this is what we are gathering data on behavior. And when we do interviews and focus group, this is more qualitative research. Then we're gathering data on perspective and understanding experience. Okay, and by the way, when we do interview, we could interview the librarians, and we could interview the users too, depending if we're going to if we're evaluating process or outputs, or if we are evaluating outcomes. Okay, you see how the difference works here? So we may have structured interview or unstructured long interviews. And I have done this many times for libraries. When I have studied information seeking behavior, I do long interviews of users, because I want to understand how they search, access, retrieve, and manage information. Okay? And then we have case studies, and that's based on a single organization, and it provides a deeper understanding on how that organization, in this case a library, works. Okay, but it's harder to do, and it needs careful planning. I think what we have to understand about this lecture is that assessing and evaluating a reference service is very important, because we want to first we want to improve a service, and let's go back here. The reasons why. Okay, we want to assess because we want to improve the quality of the service. We want to identify if we need new services or programs. We want to justify funding and support, and we want to better manage our human resources. We may find that we need more professional development. We will find that we need more physical resources, electronic and printed, or even that we need more technology or a better technology, information technology. And we need to justify the need for maintaining the services or improving them. So the key here is that it is very important for any organization, especially for a non-profit organization, as the library is, to keep evaluating its reference service to improve them and to get the level of funding necessary. Okay, thank you so much.